Cindy Williams, meteorologist Joe Cupo, and Lee Goldberg with sports.
Think back to your American history classes. Chances are you learned a lot about World War I.
But how much did you learn about the Spanish flu outbreak? That flu killed far more people than the war around the world and here in Maine. Tonight, NewsCenter's Jennifer Brooks has a special report on the pandemic of 1918. They called it the grip.
By September of 1918, the U.S. had been involved in World War I for nearly a year and a half. On the home front, the war effort dominated daily life, and nowhere more so than in Bath, Maine, where the population had doubled to support the shipyards working overtime for the Navy.
And so here we are in a very difficult time in our American history, and suddenly this disease starts coming in and starts hitting everybody, but killing young adults, people who are otherwise very, very healthy.
They called it the Spanish flu, or the grip, a worldwide pandemic. Recently, Maine's public health director, Dora Mills, spent weeks going over 1,500 pages of documents from the era.
When I started reading these materials from 1918, I thought it was going to be a big stretch to find a story or two that would be relevant to today. And what I found was I couldn't put the materials down. I found them so fascinating and so relevant, everything relevant to today.
One of the lessons, that the Spanish flu hit hard and fast. Just read the newspapers. On September 19th, 1918, the Bath Daily Times reported only a few cases of the flu. 6 days later, all schools were closed. By September 28th, the paper reported 350 cases in Bath. On October 3rd, 1,200. And on October 8th, just 2.5 weeks since that first little article, 1,800 people in Bath were suffering from the grip. The newspaper articles tell another story, too, that the flu was downplayed in the press, glossed over. Stories stressed optimism, and even at the height of the pandemic, war news came first.
It was patriotic to pretend that the flu really wasn't having as devastating an impact as it really was. In fact, interesting enough, President Wilson never went on public record to say anything about the pandemic flu of 1918. Unbelievable.
Not many people alive remember the Spanish flu pandemic, but Carrie Day, who is 100 years old, remembers. Her sister-in-law's brother took ill while in the service in New York.
And they called his mother, and she came on and was going to call his father if he needed to come. And he never got there. He really had that flu.
Day was 12. Her family lived in Bath near Grace Church, which had been converted to a hospital.
And I can remember, I lived on Oak Street then, I can remember walking by, hurrying by, you know, had to walk by it, because it was all people who had that flu.
Bath, where shipbuilders lived and worked in close quarters, was one of the cities hardest hit by the pandemic. Another was Lewiston. In 1918, the Lewiston mills were filled with immigrants, mainly from Quebec. And since their work was deemed so important, the mills did not shut down.
While people were, working for 12 hours a day in very crowded conditions in the factories and going home to unheated tenement buildings when the kids couldn't go to school and they couldn't go to the movie theaters at night, and this flu just hit like a fire.
Maine rallied by forming influenza committees, training young women to work as nurses, setting up hospitals in churches and hotels, and pulling together to care for the sick. But still, statewide, the statistics seem almost unreal. In October of 1918 alone, 2,500 people died of influenza. By May of 1919, 5,000 Mainers were gone.
5,000 deaths of mostly young people.
2/3 of those who died were between the ages of 10 and 50, more than half between the ages of 20 and 40. And consider this, 1,026 Mainers died while serving in the military during World War I. More than half of those died of influenza.
You know, there is that old saying about history repeating itself, and I believe unless we really spend more time looking at the lessons from 1918, history can easily repeat itself.
Now, nationwide, an estimated 600,000 people died of the influenza, the worst epidemic in U.S. history. But Dr. Mills wants to stress that although 5,000 people died in Maine, the vast majority of people, 785,000 at that time, survived. Today, there is real planning underway in case of another pandemic flu outbreak. Tonight on 207, Dr. Mills will talk about the state's efforts. And on News Center at 11, we will see how one rural Maine hospital is leading the charge to be prepared next time. For much more information on the pandemic flu, go to the FMI section.